Ahoy! Where is it?
Here I am.
Ahoy, mateys, and welcome to another episode of I'm Ready, a SpongePod Squarecast. My name is Captain Eric. Welcome aboard as we continue our sail through the third season of SpongeBob SquarePants. Today's episode is probably on the top 10 lists of most SpongeBob fans. It's certainly a fan favorite episode. For most of you, I would probably bet this is your number one episode of season 3. Which, for some, would therefore make it the number one episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. This is certainly up there. Idiot Box, the second half of the 44th episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. This episode first premiered on March 1st, 2002, and it is written by Paul Tibbitt, Ken Osborne, and Meriwether Williams. Our storyboard artists are Carson Kogler, William Reese, and Mike Roth. Our storyboard directors are Paul Tibbitt and Ken Osborne. Our animation director is Andrew Overtoom, and our creative director is Derek Dryman. This is just another example as to why you can just be super simple with SpongeBob, but then get so much comedy out of these characters and the situations they're put in. That's why I love episodes that take place primarily on Conch Street and don't leave that location. Because you can just, even with these characters and in their front yards and their backyards without leaving that space, there's so much comedy to be found. All you realistically have to do is have SpongeBob and Patrick do something outside that annoys Squidward, and that's classic SpongeBob comedy in my opinion. And this is one of its best examples of where even SpongeBob and Patrick doing something so mundane, so inoffensive, probably the least annoying we've ever seen them. Yet Squidward cannot get them and what they're doing out of his head throughout the entire day. It's certainly impressive and kind of just shows you a little bit more of that manic state that Squidward usually finds himself going down frequently. And those kind of tend for some pretty good episodes, and we've seen that a lot throughout the run of SpongeBob. Just Squidward, where his mind gets fixated on one thing and just can't let it go, and he's just driving himself crazy when he has every reason to be excited, because right in the beginning of this episode, my man gets a free big screen television. Wouldn't we all love to be in Squidward's position? Imagine your neighbor buying like a 70-inch 4K flat screen television, and they just throw the television out and they just want the box. Imagine them putting that giant television right out of the box onto their garbage. Like, wouldn't you ask too? Hey, you're just throwing that out? Can I have it? But you would think with that he would be able to just have a good day, but no, he's too fixated on whatever SpongeBob and Patrick are doing. So that's what we find themselves in. In the beginning of this episode, SpongeBob and Patrick are actually waiting for the mail, and Squidward is trying to enjoy his day, which of course I guess can't be achieved with SpongeBob and Patrick doing. Even just hopping around for the mail is just something that is enough to grab Squidward's attention and usually derail him on whatever his plans are. I really like the joke using Patrick's glasses here as he's going to look into the distance for the mailman. He puts two, he actually calls them glasses, but he puts two actual like water glasses up to his eyes as he would for binoculars. And on the other side of the glasses, we see kind of the water come down, and we see realistic eyes for a moment for a nice visual gag. It hits every time. It's something that's just, it's still funny after all these years, because they don't do it often. Those kind of jokes that'll use real life in various ways. We see it here and there, and I think that their uses of it are so infrequent, which, because of that, means that every time they do that, it does still hit in a massive way. Thinking about, Tom Kenny in the shower in Nicktoons episode. Thinking about Tom Kenny as the hot sauce, his face. I don't know. Do we have whose eyes those were? I don't know if that information is out there. I would not be surprised if they are Tom Kenny's eyes. as well. They tend to use him a lot in these, as you can, I've already mentioned him. I love SpongeBob and Patrick's little hopping enthusiasm waiting for the mail. When you're a kid, getting things in the mail is an exciting thing. I can tell you, as someone who has worked in industries where you're a part of what you have to do is to sign people up to receive something. If it's kid appropriate, a lot of parents like sign stuff up for their kids. Just hey, my kid loves receiving magazines or stuff in the mail, so that's usually something that I'm sure all of us can relate to. Thinking back to a time that you knew something was coming in, and that excitement waiting for it, even if you knew that day it was coming, the second you saw that mail truck, the UPS truck, you just got super excited. But always ship through the USPS. That's a statement from Captain Eric here. Squidward calls this happy hopping moron day. While he's, once again, he had something he was going to do, and he just stops what he's doing to stare at these at his neighbors, who he says he doesn't like, but spends an awful lot of time, staring at him and making commentary, and usually that's what gets him in trouble. You think he would, catch on at this point. Anyway, as I've already mentioned, SpongeBob and Patrick are waiting for a television. They ordered a television. They received this massive box that you would think with the size of the TV we eventually get, this box would be bigger. But it's a box that's big enough for both characters to comfortably sit in. Even all three characters eventually in this episode. But to give you that distinction, visually it seems to be almost like a TARDIS type situation where the box is one size, but then inside it can be whatever size they need it to be. Of course, it's animation. We can have fun like that. So, but the box is, when seeing it, you wouldn't think there would be enough space for three people to sit in comfortably. But it's a decent sized box. Once it's opened, we see that SpongeBob and Patrick hoist up a massive television and immediately throw said television right onto SpongeBob's garbage can, and are just content with the box. The joke being that they seemingly purchased this massive electronic only for the box and its size that it came with, because these characters just like using their imagination and sitting alone in a box. Something that, once again, we can all relate to. If you ever were a kid and your parents purchased anything that came with a giant box, being inside of that box was an experience. There's nothing like, when you're a small child and you can fit in one of those boxes, and especially when you eventually grow older and learn that you can pull pranks with those kind of boxes. No further explanation on that one. But Squidward notices this act and immediately hops to with what we would all do in that situation. I mean, completely perplexed at the act of throwing a television out, but then going over and asking his neighbor, "Hey, can I have that television?" It's funny because the size of the television, if you remember, there was a time when to have the biggest TVs, you basically, even when there were flat screens, they were so massive that there was no need to have a TV stand, because the TV itself was so big. It was its own TV stand. If anyone remembers, before they had they were still flat screen, but they were just these massive projection TVs. They just huge. And this is the TV that Squidward has is actually not that far off from the kind of TVs that we had at that time, as far as like massive televisions. And these things, I mean, they can't hold a candle to the kind of TVs that we have today, but for their time, I mean, it was pretty cool to see those massive televisions, especially if you just, weren't used to them. Squidward does get the television and is still kind of, he's so perplexed at SpongeBob and Patrick's enthusiasm over this box, even after they explain to him that their fun comes from using their, and I'm sure you know what's coming, imagination in the box. That's all you really need when you're a kid. Think of the amount of times you could run around a field or woods. Well, probably not these days, but if you had friends that you were hanging out with and you pretended, even on a playground where you would play pretend and act off of that, and where you're playing house or firefighters or cops or you're replaying your favorite movies or TV shows anytime. Like when you're able to just lock into your imagination, it can be the funnest can have when you're at that age. I even think when you're older, we all kind of use our imagination in various ways. It's kind of our part of thinking is we're always kind of thinking of even if you're staying very realistic, even if you're thinking of possible outcomes of future events, it's you using your imagination. And we can figure things, using that can help figure things out, but also, help make future decisions. And there's so much to use with your imagination. It's such a wonderful part of being alive and thinking. And that's all you really need. Now, Squidward doesn't need any of that, just has his television. He just scoots off. I gotta say, SpongeBob is an incredible neighbor to spend that kind of money on ordering a television and giving it to his neighbor. They immediately set their sights on a mountain climbing adventure, and the second they close the box, us as the audience are hearing apparently the same thing that Squidward is hearing, where when SpongeBob and Patrick are inside of the box, it's almost like an audio, like a pre-produced professional audio drama. There's sound effects of them in the snow. There's some light skiing music or yodeling music that reminded me of the yodeler like mini game on The Price is Right. We can hear some weather coming in. It sounds like there's a lot going on, and Squidward, this catches his attention, and he is amazed by what he's hearing happening in this box. Now, even eventually when he kicks the box, because he just, he thinks these guys are just idiots, he causes an avalanche that he hears these characters just screaming in pain, and it's not supposed to be funny, but knowing that SpongeBob and Patrick are just sitting inside the box and what we're hearing is not really happening, it is absolutely hilarious. I think it this time around, that sound of them screaming in the avalanche just made me gut laugh harder than almost any other part of this episode. It's that just go back and watch it. That part is legitimately hilarious. Even the second avalanche when Squidward goes and lightly touches the box, because he is what he's hearing. He is so convinced that is happening in the box that he is concerned for the well-being of the characters after their avalanche experience. He eventually opens the box to just find that SpongeBob and Patrick are simply sitting in the box with their eyes closed. And they're just using their imagination. Everything that Squidward was hearing, he's convinced of how well it sounds. They have to be using some sort of tape recorder or some sort of recording. Throughout the entire episode, he is absolutely obsessed about this. I love Patrick screaming out "Excelsior" in the mountain climbing adventure as he's climbing the mountain and not being safe. But nice little shout out to Stan Lee there. I imagine it has to be. It's not like this was made earlier and no, like if you're mentioning Excelsior in anything, it's got to be a nod to Stan Lee. The ideas that they bring up here at the end with the characters talking about cutting off their limbs with a saw reminded me of the movie Saw, which definitely wasn't out at this time. So I don't know if somebody heard that and thought, hey, I should make a horror movie off of that idea. But we had that mention here. Just them talking about it. These cartoon characters talking about being able to cut off their legs and their arms. Just super funny. The whole mountain climbing adventure is absolutely hilarious, and Squidward's concern is adorable. It's kind of the part about his character that at the end of the day he does really like his neighbors and really does care for them. He doesn't want them. He just wants them to go away and not annoy him. He does not want them physically harmed. I'm sure some days he does, but he generally doesn't want SpongeBob and Patrick to be harmed. And when he hears about their possible situation, he shows concern, and it's absolutely adorable. He eventually is convinced that, all right, hanging out in boxes must be a cool thing. Throughout his house, he is looking for a box for him to use, comes across a hat box, pulls out a sombrero and mentions that he hasn't even worn this yet. And it's funny because if you are a SpongeBob fan, you should recognize that sombrero is the same sombrero he pulls out during the camping episode. And I like the little start here of that joke. He tosses the sombrero out of frame and doesn't mention it again, but just the fact that eventually we circle back to that is extremely hilarious. Squidward tries sitting in this hat box, and his attempt is there. I'll give him some points, but he just thinks that sitting in a box and putting the top on his head is somehow going to magically make sounds appear, and he's going to have this experience, and doesn't understand the idea of using your imagination. He still is consistently hearing SpongeBob and Patrick having a fun time in their box, and is so convinced that they must be cheating in some way, that he just can't just move on with his day. He tries to with watching the television. He eventually gets to watching the big screen television that he got for free from SpongeBob, but every channel that he flips to has some programming that has to do with boxes. Especially, I love the last gag here when he gets to championship boxing, and it's literally, he even laughs at it like, huh, all right, like that this doesn't really have anything to do with the actual boxes. And then we get to the actual boxing, and it's boxes in a ring boxing. That gag right there, 10 out of 10. Absolutely love it. Makes Squidward goes absolutely bananas. He's done watching television. He's just got boxes on his mind. Eventually, he kicks out his little hat box, which comes back to my favorite, like probably my favorite little Patrick moment ever. But he throws the hat box out of the house, which SpongeBob and Patrick gladly take into their box. They're happy to see any kind of boxes. Eventually, this moment comes back when Squidward opens up their box again, and Patrick is inside of the hat box, fully inside. I mean, they have the powers to do what I guess Squidward can't, which is just make everything like a TARDIS, where inside is just going to be bigger. But he's able to fit fully inside of this hat box. So when Squidward opens up the big box, Patrick comes out of the small box saying, "Here I am." It's just, I don't know. It's one of my favorite little Patrick moments. It's so adorable. I absolutely love it. Now Squidward is game to sit inside of the box, and this is where he comes and sits down inside, and he just wants to watch and observe SpongeBob and Patrick on what they're doing to achieve the kind of noises he's hearing on the outside. He chooses the adventure as Robot Pirate Island. He wants to see robots and pirates duke it out on a beach. And eventually what he sees is SpongeBob and Patrick closing their eyes and just making very light sounds like beeps, boops, and saying, ahoy. Not really the same kind of sounds that one would want to hear, and Squidward is convinced that these guys are just fully messing with him. That they're lying in some way, and they're holding something behind his back, and he's completely convinced about this. Enough so that he leaves and decides that he's going to just ignore them and try to move on with his day and break into the box once they're done using it. And doesn't think that they're going to be in there all night, but what we see is that SpongeBob and Patrick pretty much spend the entire day inside of that box, Squidward being forced to hear the entire story of Robot Pirate Island all the way up until the fireworks, seemingly with the pirates stopping the robot menace. Now, eventually, SpongeBob and Patrick call it a night, decide to get out of the box, and that they'll come back to their box tomorrow after refueling their imagination. This is Squidward's moment. It's his moment to go inside of the box, and he does so. Now, I love the idea that just another thing that is a good reminder of childhood. But you ever remember just where you have a day off, there's no school, and you're hanging out with friends, and your plan is just one thing, and it's just so, even whether it's a video game or playing outside, playing a sport, doing something, but where you just do it for hours on end, where it's just sunrise to sunset, and time just completely flies by. The little sequence here where we see time fly by, unfortunately from Squidward's point of view, and it's not a happy sight, but it's such a wonderful reminder of childhood and having those just like hour-long sessions of having fun with your friends, and even if it's just the one thing you're doing, it didn't matter. It didn't matter that you did it for like 7 or 8 hours. There was no care in the world. So eventually Squidward gets inside of the box and of course can't find the button or tape recorder he's looking for because it doesn't exist. The imagination is inside of his head. I like the little plaque that was left behind for the brave pirates who sacrificed their lives. But eventually, Squidward, with the assistance of an actual dump truck, is able to find a bit of his imagination. Due to the sounds of a dump truck coming over and taking the box, Squidward initially is thinking like, well, if I just sit here and start pretending I'm in a race car, then I'm going to be in an actual race car. And of course, due to some comedic timing, right as Squidward starts hitting the gas and is starting to drive, is all the sounds of the dump truck that he's hearing. What we get, though, is just a classic Squidward moment where he's given the joy he's looking for in life or in that situation, whatever story you're writing about him. He gets to enjoy it. He gets to taste the sun for a second, and then it's immediately yanked right under him. And Squidward, as a character, we do get to see him win once in a while, but for the most part, we have to see him lose a good chunk of the time. Now because the dump truck took this box, it just flung it at the dump, and Squidward gets flung out of the box, landing his face into a massive pie. And there, he gets a pie in the face, and he's just taken from his home and brought all the way to the dump, and unfortunately the experience he had in the box is a bit short-lived. SpongeBob and Patrick come out the next morning and are sad to see their box go, but we do get this nice little end joke of Patrick hoping that Squidward is not too down in the dumps. We get a bit of a rim shot here, and which brings us to the end of this episode. The idiot box, for those that don't know, was a name given to the television for those who didn't like that people would just spend all day, all night staring at the boob tube and soak in as much entertainment as they can. I mean, especially when you had like 5 or 6 channels, even when you had 50, hey, that, how much you could be watching 24 hours from that content? That's so much. Now there's just thousands of channels, and then when you open it up to YouTube and streaming services, there is way too much out there. But yeah, that is Idiot Box, one of the most classic SpongeBob episodes you can think of, due to the fact that SpongeBob's imagination pose is one of, if not the most iconic image of SpongeBob. If you think of like all of the memes of SpongeBob SquarePants, if you had to have the one that was like, this just represents the character, him making a rainbow is the best one that I can think of. It's just, everybody knows the imagination bit. It has transcended the show at this point. And there's nothing wrong, this whole idea of like SpongeBob being associated with rainbows and how, it is or isn't, associating itself with whatnot. Like, who cares? Rainbows are great. Rainbows are beautiful. It includes every single color. What's there not to like about a rainbow? And SpongeBob looks great making a rainbow with his hands. So much so that it's a move in All-Star Brawl, which it makes sense. It's just one of those like day one type ideas when it comes to making a fighting set with SpongeBob SquarePants. I absolutely love this episode. I have no doubt that when ranking season 3, it's going to fall up there with some of the best of the best with this season. I don't think it is my number 1, but I have no doubt it'll sit in my top 5. This was the number 1 voted episode for the cast to reenact at the 2015 San Diego Comic-Con. It is, like I said, this is a really beloved episode for these little moments, and it doesn't take much to write an iconic SpongeBob episode. Now, that's not to say it's not hard, but just in terms of like where you tee off an idea, hey, SpongeBob and Patrick using their imagination and annoying Squidward in that way, boom, that's build the comedy off of that, and that's what they do in this episode beautifully, and it's still worth watching all of these years later. This is one of those episodes that 50 years, 100 years from now, as I even said in the Nasty Patty, this is another one that, like, the imagination bit of SpongeBob, this entire episode is going to be fondly remembered. It's just one of those top tier SpongeBob episodes. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that this episode of the Squarecast. I just want to thank you if you are a listener of my content. It is much appreciated. No matter where you are listening or watching this, I just want you to know that I appreciate you. I know you're out there, and I'm glad that you make me a part of your week just like you are a part of mine. If there's any way for you to show your support in liking any of the videos or sharing any of the content I put out on forums, on Facebook groups, anywhere you think that they might enjoy extra SpongeBob, Nickelodeon, or any of the extra content I put out, if you could do any of that, it is always appreciated on my end. Thank you very much. I hope you all are staying safe out there. Thank you for listening, and we will see you here next week.
Squidward, we don't need television. Not as long as we have our imagination.